A single musician can play an interesting piece of music, but what if you had an entire band? If you had an entire band, you can make a far more complex composition, right? A far more complicated piece of music. Now, our bodies work the same way. Picture this. Picture Ferb here, right? He is a human just like us, and he's made up of trillions of cells. Now, what makes humans so complicated, kind of like an orchestra, is that we have so many different kinds of cells. Just like an orchestra has so many different kinds of musicians. If we only had one type of cell, we would look like a brick. We wouldn't look so complicated or be able to do so many complicated things. So the reason why we can be so complex and do so many different things, like running, like lifting, like thinking, like seeing, like hearing, like speaking, all of these things are only possible because we have so many different kinds of cells. Just like an orchestra has so many different kinds of musicians. We call this emergent properties. Okay, we call this emergent properties. This just means with more cells and the fact that each cell is different allows us to be very complicated, become emergent. Okay, so we know when I show that he is made up of this cell represents all cells, okay? Our cells, we can have many types of cells, like a neuron, like a red blood cell, like muscle cells, like fat cells, okay? We have so many. And all of these work together to make us complicated and very capable to do many different things, just like this orchestra, okay? So this is what we call emergent properties. Now, my question to you is pretty complicated. How is it possible to have so many different types of cells if they all have the same DNA, right? Because we know that, for example, how it works is we have a sperm coming from our dad and an egg coming from our mom, right? This is how reproduction happens. So the sperm from the dad will donate half DNA, so 23 chromosomes, and the mom will donate 23 chromosomes. So when the dad sends his 23 chromosomes to the mom's nucleus, it will form a total of what? 46 chromosomes. And we know human cells have 46 chromosomes, thereby forming the first cell that you're made of, right? So this cell, after reproduction, so this cell, after fertilization, will go on to divide trillions of times, forming you, right? Because we are made up of trillions of cells. So we know, like I said, that this cell doesn't divide and become the same cell all over and over again. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to look the way we do and do all the things we can do if all the cells did the same thing. So the single cell formed will divide many times, but some of the cells, so let me show you here. Some of the cells will become muscle cells, some will become neurons, some will become red blood cells. So my question is, why does this happen? I thought all the cells had the same DNA, and the DNA is like the instruction manual, right? An instruction manual basically tells the cell what to do. Okay, so if all the cells have the same instruction manual, why do they look different? So this is super interesting. So when we look at the DNA, okay, because by the way, when the cell divides, right, it divides by a process called mitosis. Maybe you haven't learned about this yet, definitely not if you're only learning now 1.1 here, but mitosis is the process of a cell dividing, so becoming one cell dividing into two cells. And when this happens, the DNA stays the same, okay? So when the cell divides into two, the two baby cells will have the exact same DNA as the parent cell. So that's why I keep saying, why do we have so many different types of cells then? So the answer to this is, we're going to look at the DNA. When we're zooming in now here to the nucleus, okay? And we know that's where DNA is located, our instruction manual, okay? Now, basically, the way these different cells end up forming from the same DNA is like this, okay? Each cell will not use all of the DNA, okay? Each cell has all the DNA. So this cell has the exact same DNA as this cell, exact same DNA as this cell, yet they look different. And the reason is because each cell will read a different part of the DNA. So for example, let's say this cell here, this muscle cell, is gonna read this part of the DNA. Okay, it's gonna read this part, and it's only gonna read this part and do what this part says, and this part says become a muscle cell. Okay, and so in that way it doesn't read any of the other things. Okay, it's only going to read the part that it cares about. Okay, and that's going to be this part, and that's going to allow it to become a muscle cell. On the contrary, this cell maybe reads a different part. So for example, let's say this neuron here will read this part. Okay, maybe it will read this part here, maybe a bigger piece. He will read this. Okay, he will follow this instruction, and it will not read any of the other bits. Let me show you. So it will not read that top part here, and it will not read the bottom part. Okay, so this is in a very basic way of how it works. So that's why all these different cells can exist, because they read and listen to a different part of the DNA. They have all of the DNA each, but they don't listen and do everything the whole DNA says. Each of them, they all listen to a specific part and only become what that specific part is saying. Okay, so that's basically why from this one single cell that was formed when the two cells fertilized, that cell became trillions of cells, but each of those cells didn't become the exact same type of cell because they read a different part of the DNA and listened to a different part of the DNA. Okay, so in terms of words, I can put this as this. Differentiation, by the way, is the name we give to this. Differentiation is the name we give to one cell becoming a specific type of cell. Okay, so this cell differentiated into this muscle cell, or this one differentiated into this cell, this one differentiated into this cell. Okay, differentiate just means becoming specific, becoming a specific type of cell. So in conclusion here, differentiation involves the expression of some genes from the organism's genome. So genome is the collection of DNA in the nucleus, but not others. So that's exactly what I said. To become this cell, we had to express, to become this cell, we had to express this part of the genome, but not the others, okay? Whereas to become this one, we had to express this part, but not the others, okay? So that's why it can be so, that's why we're able to make so many different types of cells and have emergent properties, okay? Because of all these different cells, we can do so many complicated things. We can move because of our muscle cells. We can stay warm because of fat cells. We can think and cause our muscles to move because of the neurons. We can carry oxygen because of the red blood cell, okay? So all this differentiation, this ability to differentiate, gives rise to our emergent properties, our ability to be like an orchestra and be complicated, okay? So that's why. I hope this makes a little bit of sense. And now to kind of conclude here with an arm is not just made up of one type of cell, right? Some of the cells became skin cells, some of them became tendons, some of them became ligaments, some of them became muscle cells, some of them became fat cells, some of them became neurons to allow the muscles to move, and so much more, right? So it is really important to understand that differentiation allows all of these emergent properties, allows our arm to be so complicated in itself, okay? So that's it for this video on emergent properties and differentiation.